Hi, AP Psych friends. So yeah, I totally jinxed us by saying that our last video was the last video. And of course, the information in it was taking me longer than the 15 minutes I am allotted. So my apologies. But here, I promise, pinky swear, this is the last video ever. And then you're all done with your Myers textbook. So when we last were here, we were talking about social relations, and we had left off with attraction, right? So that there were some factors that influenced a person's level of attraction to somebody else. And then we were talking about the difference between romantic passionate love and the characteristics that are needed for that compassionate love, that deep affection, that long-term relationship, right? The key being the fact that the relationship is equitable and that it is a truthful, right, relationship based on self-disclosure. Okay, so our last two topics, altruism and conflict and peacemaking. So let's talk about altruistic acts first. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that our 40 studies readings over the summer told us about Kitty Genovese and Darley and Latané's views, research on the bystander effect, right? And so think about the conditions that you learned about in that 40 studies reading that make or determine whether or not an individual is going to, help, or, in terms of, somebody in need, or if they will fall victim to the bystander effect. Okay, the larger the group, the more diffusion of responsibility that occurs. Whether or not a person feels responsible for what just happened, or whether or not the person feels, socially obligated to help. Like, those things will all play a role in whether or not a person commits an altruistic act or whether they fall prey to the bystander effect. But what are some reasons for why people do good acts towards other people? One explanation is the social exchange theory. And this is kind of rooted in this, psychological egoist mentality that, benefits are maximized and costs are reduced if we, have this mentality of, I'll scratch my back if you scratch yours. That whenever anyone is doing an altruistic act, ideally, there's, or I guess realistically, there is something that they benefit from by doing that, whether it be an actual, tangible reward, or whether it just be, the good positive emotions that you get as a result of helping someone else, right? Think back to feel good, do good phenomenon. Then, some social psychologists will argue that that's the main motivation for why some people choose to help others. But there are some other explanations. A slightly different spin on that is what's known as the reciprocity norm, and that this would just be, the social norm that exists, that people who have helped others in the past will be helped and not hurt when the time comes. So in social exchange, it seems as if the action is being done simply because somebody is getting something in return, like in the short run, immediately in return, whether it be emotions or something more tangible. And the reciprocity norm is basically just saying, look, you do something for someone because you would hope, if you were ever in that same situation, that they would reciprocate or do the same, or that you do good for people, and you hope that if for some reason you ever needed assistance, that they'd remember all the good that you had done towards them. A third explanation would be the social responsibility norm, that we have, a moral obligation to help others in need. And this makes me think about the Zimbardo video and the fact that, everyday citizens can be, heroes in according to his research, and that we can't fall victim to, that passive inactivism, that we have a duty to be involved, or a duty to help others in need. And so those are just some different explanations of why, individuals may choose to commit, good or nice acts towards another person. The last topic to talk about concerning social relations is the issue of conflict and peacemaking. And so, some things that can impede on peacemaking between two conflicting groups, are what are known as social traps and mirror image perceptions. Social traps are just those situations where, the rational pursuit of self-interest actually leads to destructive behavior. And so, think about any situation where, a nation state has maybe, went to war in the quest for some good, but as a result has ended up, destroying their own homeland, or the loss of citizen lives as a result of engaging in a war. And so oftentimes social traps can impede on peacemaking process, like this idea of no, this is our quest for good, or our quest for things for to better our own group, but that actually ends up hurting them in the long run. Mirror image perceptions are actually mutual views that are held by conflicting groups. And so maybe hard for us to imagine, but I don't doubt that it exists. Like when I think about, current relations, with a state such as North Korea, that their attempt to proliferate is really like we're just protecting ourselves and viewing themselves as being peace loving and ethical, and the same guys like other countries, the United States, for example, viewing themselves as being peace-loving and ethical, yet standing, in the way of North Korea, right? And so, again, I'm not here to, have a politically charged discussion on, our duty to intervene in international conflict, but there's something to be said about usually if you talk to conflicting groups, each one views themselves as the victim, each one views themselves as being peace-loving and ethical, and that it's the other side that is, refusing to cooperate or refusing, to, step down from a conflict. Okay, just two more items here. Oftentimes when trying to, resolve conflicts and move towards peacemaking, mediators would have to focus on what's called a superordinate goal. The superordinate goal is going to be a goal that's shared, that can be used to help override conflicts. And so, it's not, we can have contact with, through a mediator, but if we can have cooperative contact between two conflicting groups because of a superordinate goal, you can find that peaceful things, can be resolved. And so, the differences between, Palestinians and Israelis, finding a shared goal that overrides conflict. And a lot of times, they'll focus on the fact that there are a lot of, obviously historically significant sites located in, that their geographical territory, and that it's, although the two groups may be, at odds with one another, like neither of them want to destroy, historic artifacts that are, crucial to, both religious and ethnic backgrounds. And so that might be a way to get them to cooperate, in the preservation of, sacred lands and sacred, objects to them. The last thing to mention here is GRIT, which actually stands for Graduated and Reciprocated Initiatives Intention Reduction. And what that is just showing you the application of social traps, mirror image perceptions, how we can avoid those two things, and how we can focus on superordinate goals to reduce international tensions. I guess I maybe jumped the gun in that all of my examples so far under this have been about international relations, but I guess as a social studies teacher, that's just where my mind gravitates. But GRIT would involve conciliatory acts on each side. And so how this works is that one of the groups takes the first step and decides, to make some conciliatory acts and expects that there will be reciprocation. If there's not reciprocation, then obviously there's no obligation to maintain the gestures that you put forward. And if for some reason the conflicting party decided to attack or invade the party that made the first step towards cooperation, obviously you're okay to retaliate or defend oneself under GRIT. But GRIT is, something that's been used in mediations between conflicting, nation states or conflicting, political organizations all over the world. One example that's mentioned in your textbook is of when John F. Kennedy made the small gesture of saying that the United States would no longer do atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons. That went a long way in getting the world to eventually put a ban on atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons. And just, that small gesture, look, the United States will be the first one to not do that anymore. And we hope that others would reciprocate, led to, cooperation and peacemaking and effective change on a global level. And so GRIT is just used as an example to show you how these social psychological terms can be applied on a global scale. And so now finally we are done with Unit 14. Just bring any questions that you have concerning Video A or this one with you to class, and I'll be happy to discuss them with you. And as always, thanks for listening.